You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and thanks again for your patronage. Today, we are talking to Louis Trott, who's a licensed battlefield guide. He's a U.S. Army veteran. Currently, he's a librarian, and he put together this awesome episode about the connections to the Lincoln assassination and the Battle of Gettysburg, connections between them, I should say. And he sat with Bob and I. It's just very interesting. We get into the history of the assassination, threats of assassination, I should say, against Lincoln, from basically the moment he's elected all the way up until the actual assassination is pulled off by John Wilkes Booth in 1865. Then what happens afterwards, and the people who were part of the assassination, the trial, and the executions, who also had something to do with the Battle of Gettysburg. Not something to do. They were here at the Battle of Gettysburg in one way or another, either directly or indirectly, as you'll see when we get into this conversation here. So what are those connections? Well, like I always say, I'm learning and you're learning. So let's learn together with Louis Trott as he walks us through the connections between the Battle of Gettysburg and the Lincoln assassination. As always, I'm sitting here with Bob. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Matt.
And our guest today is Louis Trott. Louis, we're talking about the Gettysburg connections to the Lincoln assassination.
Yes.
A lot of people might be confused by that. What does that mean? What are you talking connections? It was 2 years apart almost. Like what the dilly? So let's get into that. What is, first of all, before we get into the connections though, how about you give us a history of assassination threats against Lincoln or plots that were foiled or whatever? Because the actual assassination was not the first or the only, I guess, or yeah, it would be the first attempt to do it.
Yes, and it's almost immediate. Of course, the South sort of goes haywire once Lincoln is elected. Shortly thereafter, before he's even inaugurated, South Carolina secedes, and then the dominoes start to fall. But as Lincoln is making his way to the district to take the oath and become the next president, there are stories that, there's going to be trouble along the way, and he's being warned about what could happen, especially in Baltimore. Baltimore is very pro-Southern. As a side note, interesting, later as the war is ending, there's a Union general in Richmond after Richmond falls, and he writes back to Stanton. He wires back to Stanton that Richmond is more pro-Union than Baltimore is. And this is in 1865. So you can imagine what Baltimore was like in 1860, 1861. But as the train is scheduled to come through Baltimore, Lincoln's warned, you don't want to take the trip during the daylight hours. There's a plot to assassinate you. We need to address that and adjust the schedule. Lincoln at first is against it. Finally, they talk him into, we'll, adjust the schedule. And they end up coming through during the middle of the night. They briefly stop at Baltimore because to get to D.C., I'm not sure if it's like this now. I'm sure it's not. But back then, you had to switch trains coming through Baltimore to get to D.C. The line just didn't come straight through. You had to get off one train, and, of course, that's a hazard with lack of security and such. So they finally convince him. He does come through in the middle of the night. Newspapers that aren't exactly thrilled with Lincoln jump on that. There's a famous cartoon about him. He's kind of peeking out of a box car, and there's this, like a Halloween cat, glaring at him and screeching at him and stuff. So people were making fun of him. So the threats start almost immediately. Of course, back then, there's no Secret Service like there is today. There is not a lot to really protect the president or the White House, for that matter. Mm-hmm. People could come up to the White House and come on in. Right. And they used to have problems with people stealing stuff for souvenirs. Look, I got the White House drapes. How about me? So there is that. And then they get rumors throughout that, throughout his tenure that there's danger afoot. You could possibly be assassinated or something else.
Now, is there any kind of bodyguard in place for the president before Lincoln?
Not really, not officially.
Right.
One of his friends, the name slips my mind, Lamont.
Lamont was his last name.
Yeah. He acts as his unofficial bodyguard.
Lord Layman?
Layman.
Yeah, Layman. Yeah. He acts sort of as an official bodyguard. He's a good friend of his. Frequently, when the Lincolns would go out, they go to the theater or they go out riding to the Old Soldiers' Home, which was north of Washington, a couple miles. He wouldn't have any bodyguards. He'd just be out in the open. Later on, he does get a troop of cavalry that follows him out there and back to sort of protect him as best they can. But that wasn't always the case. Too often, as in hindsight, he would go out without any sort of protection.
Yeah, he would slip away from his guards.
Let's remember, we've never had a president assassinated.
Yeah, well, and even after that, the notion of protecting a president is not really latched onto that well, because we have
3 more
Garfield and McKinley. And interestingly, Robert Lincoln is with those other 2 also. Lincoln's his son, right. So that's another story. But
there's
he doesn't take protection very seriously because, as you say, Bob, nothing's happened before, and we see it comes back to haunt him.
There's a quote from Secretary of State Seward. He says, "Assassination is not an American practice or habit, and no one so vicious and so desperate cannot be engrafted into our political system." That was his, I guess, the attitude, because leading up to Lincoln, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah, and throughout the war, it's thought of that's an uncivilized practice in warfare. Mm-hmm. Civilized armies, the Confederate Army and the Northern Army, would not engage in that type of activity because it's deemed uncivilized. It's against civilized warfare, which is sort of...
So was there credible evidence about this plot as Lincoln's coming into Washington before the inauguration?
Yes, they've got wind of it, and that's why they rearranged the train schedule. So
But never any arrests or anything like that?
Not that I know of. There may have been some people arrested. Of course, they're arresting all kinds of people after the war. The shooting war starts. They arrest newspaper editors. Politicians get arrested for saying the wrong thing. Again, habeas corpus is suspended, and that's when, to this day, I don't understand, but people say, Lincoln was destroying the Constitution. We've never had anything like that Civil War fought on our continent, you know. So what would you do? Do everything you can to hold the country together. Yeah. So,
but no names that history knows involved with this conspiracy. Plot. Yes,
there may have been. I just don't know what they are.
There's he also got a lot of letters. He had a big envelope on his desk that had no fewer, that I read, than 80 assassination threat letters. And he wrote on the outside of the article, or on the outside of the envelope, assassination.
Yeah.
One of them is called the Old Abe Letter. And the guy who signed it he called himself Pete Muggins. Do you know this letter?
I've heard of it. I've heard the name because the name's kind of...
He's very eloquent. Goddamn your goddamn old hell-fired goddamn soul to hell. That was the letter.
Yeah, that's really eloquent, Matt.
The guy spent a lot of school to write that letter, you know? Paid attention to English class.
So what was Lincoln's attitude toward all this stuff? Because you have Layman, you pronounce it Layman or Lamont? Yeah, Layman. Ward Hill Layman. So he's what, the DC police chief, isn't he? District police chief or something, marshal.
Yeah.
He's the marshal, and he it's not really his job, but he takes it upon himself to protect the president.
I think others took these letters more seriously than Lincoln did. Right. I think with Lincoln, and he kind of thinks that no matter who's sitting here, they're going to get this type of thing, because one side's always angry with the other. We think it's worse now than it was then, but we really don't know. We didn't live back then.
People are always terrible.
But I just think the people around him take all that more seriously than Lincoln did.
Yeah.
And like you said, Lincoln continues to slip out on his own, going out to the Old Soldiers' Home, especially in the summer when the heat and humidity in D.C. would drive him out. And he's going to go whether you send some cavalry with him or not.
Right. And I would imagine that his staff is probably intercepting a lot of these letters and just burning them or getting rid of them somehow. He's not even seeing the vast majority of them.
Yeah, and Lincoln's trying to run the war.
Right.
Lincoln can't spend all his time worried about what seems like a bunch of letters from a crockpot.
Right.
Who, is very eloquent.
Or a crackpot.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
From a crockpot, it would be delicious.
But we've read stories how he's spending so much time in the telegraph office waiting on news from the war and stuff. That's what's engaging his mind.
Yeah, his whole thing is he says I cannot possibly guard myself against all dangers unless I shut myself up in an iron box.
Yeah,
and then basically he can't do his job if he's doing that way.
Like all great leaders, he can compartmentalize.
Right.
Yeah.
He's got a problem with a marriage or a wife. I mean, I shouldn't say marriage necessarily, but there's a whole other issue there.
Oh, God.
He's
His
losing
son
children.
dies. Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't know how he did it.
One of the reasons he was such a great president.
Yeah.
And I hope that's not a controversial statement. But anyway.
Probably in the deep south.
And that explains a lot about her after he dies. She goes down the tubes quick because Lincoln was the one person that would protect her and look after her.
Or that could put up with her.
And that was her protector. Now that's gone.
Her touchstone to reality, too.
She's out on her own. She doesn't even attend the funeral. How distraught she is. She stays cooped up in the White House for 3 weeks.
But then he also kind of seems to have this fatalistic attitude toward it. Like, and another thing he said is, if anyone is willing to give his life for mine, there's nothing I can do to prevent it.
Right.
And he's right. I mean, it's like the guys that go in combat. They're like, there's a bullet with your name on it. It's going to find you. There's nothing you can do. So just go in and do your job.
You can't live in fear.
No.
And like I said, he's got a war to run, and that's occupying all his mind.
So he makes it in. He's getting all these nasty letters. There's a plot to kill him before he even gets inaugurated. 1862, he has a close call. His hat actually has a closer call. You know the story. When a bullet whizzes through his top hat while he's riding to the soldiers' home, and they don't know where it came from, and he just kind of, it was a stray shot from a hunter. You never heard this story?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Hunter hunting top hats.
It's yeah. But and then this Lamont guy. Now a couple of times he sneaks out. Lincoln and what was his name? Cameron, I think. No, Sumner, Charles Sumner, and a foreign dignitary all go out to the theater one night. But Lincoln gave the guards the slip, and when Lamont found out about it, he wrote him a very, very scolding letter.
Yeah, because he's trying to do all he can, and you're working against me here.
Yeah.
I'm doing this for you, not for my health.
Right.
And you're working against me. Let's work together here. So,
yeah. And so then he had 4 guards that were posted or assigned to him for 24 hours a day. I think it was 2 worked from 8 to 4, and then another one from 4 to midnight, and then another one sat outside his door from midnight to 8. The one who sat outside his door said that he would often hear him moaning in his sleep through the door, which I would imagine.
He had a lot of dreams, and he equated dreams with various things. At the end of the war, he talks about all these dreams that he had before various Civil War battles, and they're all victories except Stones River. And Grant says just what I just said. They were all victories except for Stones River. We didn't win that one. And Lincoln says, yeah, but I still had the same dream. But they were on the eve of these battles.
Yeah. And more famously, when we get closer to the actual assassination, he has a dream about his own funeral in the White House, which we'll get to in a second. But what's interesting to me is that from what I've been reading, it seems to be that as the situation for the South gets worse on the battlefield, well, I guess overall too, the intensity of the threats against him raises with that.
Yeah, because, certain people in the South see this as the end of, everything. And we've got to do whatever we can to try to reverse this. Mm-hmm. And that includes taking certain actions against the head of state for the Union. Now, the one we'll talk about today specifically doesn't start off as an assassination plot.
Right.
It begins as a kidnapping plot. They want to kidnap the president.
Hello, Getty's Nerds. It's Matt, and I hope you enjoyed that preview of our premium content that can now be found over at Patreon.com. I just want to let you know that Addressing Gettysburg will always have free content for you to listen to in the forms of our narrative episodes like Antietam to Chancellorsville and the upcoming episode entitled Invasion, June 1863, appendix episodes, and our wildly popular Ask a Gettysburg Guide episodes. But episodes like Antietam to Chancellorsville take months to produce, as things are now. I hear from people almost every day asking how long until the next episode is finished. And the answer is, when I have the time, I can do it. Your support at Patreon can cut down the time it takes to produce an episode by months. Maybe you don't care about that. Maybe the Ask a Gettysburg Guide episodes are what you like, but they leave you wanting to learn more. Well, fear not. More is what Patreon is all about. Patrons receive access to new premium episodes each week. These episodes are straight interviews or discussions with licensed battlefield guides, rangers, local historians, academics, authors, public historians, people from the Gettysburg community who do impressive things, and frankly, just about anyone who can talk on a subject related to Gettysburg. I want to make sure that the interest you already have in Gettysburg is enriched with our premium content. Your support means the world to me, because that means it will be easier to produce content that will bring Gettysburg to more people and, hopefully, more people to Gettysburg. And the podcast episodes are just the beginning. So please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg and become a patron. I thank you in advance.